Something is happening in the Middle East right now that most Americans are watching on split-second news tickers without ever getting the full picture. And if you think this is just another foreign conflict that doesn't touch your life, your economy, or your future, you need to stop and listen closely, because what is unfolding between Lebanon, Israel, and Iran is not background noise. It is the loudest signal the world has sent in decades, and it is pointing directly at the kind of global restructuring that happens once in a generation. On the night of March 11, 2026, Hezbollah launched what became the largest single barrage against Israel since the latest round of hostilities began. An opening salvo of 100 rockets fired around 8 p.m., coordinated in what Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps publicly described as an integrated operation, meaning Tehran and its proxy army in Lebanon fired simultaneously, in tandem, at the same country. Think about that for a moment. A proxy group and its state sponsor launching a coordinated, declared military operation against a sovereign nation on a schedule in synchronized waves. This is not terrorism in the conventional sense. This is warfare conducted through layered actors, with Iran in the background pulling the strings and Hezbollah on the front line absorbing the consequences. And what triggered it? The killing of Iranian Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei in the opening minutes of a joint Israeli-American air campaign that launched on February 28, 2026, an event that shook the entire architecture of Middle Eastern power overnight. Now here is where most of the mainstream coverage loses the thread completely, and where I want you to stay with me, because the thread matters enormously. When Khamenei was killed, something seismic happened inside the power calculus of the entire Iranian-backed axis. Hezbollah chief Naim Qassem had vowed that his group would confront Israel and the United States over the strikes on Iran, even as the Lebanese government pleaded with him to stay on the sidelines. The same sidelines Lebanon had kept during a previous 12-day confrontation just months earlier, but this time Qassem did not listen. He could not listen because the internal logic of Hezbollah's entire existence is built on loyalty to the Iranian revolutionary project. When the supreme leader dies in an American and Israeli airstrike, staying quiet is not an option. It would be an act of political and ideological suicide for the group. So Hezbollah entered the war, and Lebanon, a country that had desperately tried to stay out, got dragged in with it. And this is one of the deepest, most troubling patterns you have to understand about how these conflicts actually work. It is never the people of Lebanon who choose this. Lebanon's President Joseph Aoun himself said that the decision of war and peace rests solely with the Lebanese state, and Hezbollah fired anyway. The Lebanese government held emergency meetings. The Prime Minister warned that Lebanon refused to be dragged into war, and none of it mattered, because Hezbollah does not answer to Beirut. It answers to Tehran. That relationship between a sovereign nation and an armed group within it that operates according to a foreign power's strategic calendar is one of the defining political pathologies of our time, and it is not unique to Lebanon. You see it in Iraq with the Iranian-backed militias, in Yemen with the Houthis, in Syria with various IRGC-aligned factions. Iran has spent 40 years building a distributed military network across the region, precisely because it understood that it could not fight Israel or the United States directly. So it built itself a human shield of proxy armies, each one deniable, each one replaceable, each one designed to impose costs on adversaries, while Tehran claims it was not responsible. Thanks to decades of Iranian assistance, Hezbollah built up a stockpile estimated at as many as 200,000 standoff weapons, short and long-range unguided rockets, ballistic missiles, guided precision missiles, over 20 years. 20 years of arming, training, and positioning a force right on Israel's northern border. And now Israel is trying to dismantle all of it simultaneously, while also participating in a broader air campaign against Iran itself, while managing Gaza, while keeping diplomatic lines open with the United States, and while the world watches and argues about proportionality and international law. The sheer operational complexity of what Israel is attempting right now is staggering, and the fact that most American news coverage reduces it to a headline count of rockets and casualties is a profound failure of journalism. Let us talk about what actually happened in the weeks following that first coordinated barrage, because the escalation did not stop. The Alma Research and Education Center, which tracks cross-border attacks with serious rigor, reported that Hezbollah launched 105 separate attack waves on Israel in a single day, the most intense single day of attacks since the beginning of the 2026 Iran war, and that since the beginning of the war, a total of over 1,000 attack waves had been launched from Lebanese territory into Israel, 1,000 attack waves, not rockets. attack waves, each one a coordinated launch event involving rockets, drones, anti-tank missiles, or combinations of all three. And during this entire period, Israel eventually deployed 5 full military divisions into southern Lebanon, including the 98th, 36th, 91st, 146th, and 162nd Divisions, in an operation that has seen intense ground combat in towns like Bint Jbeil. Now, here is something I want you to sit with for a moment. We are talking about 5 Israeli military divisions operating simultaneously on Lebanese soil. That is not a border skirmish. That is not a measured response to provocations. That is a full-scale ground war in a neighboring country, happening in parallel with air campaigns being run against Iran itself, at the same time that American and Israeli aircraft are conducting what can only be described as a joint war against the Iranian state. The United States of America, your country, is actively at war in the Middle East again, and the conversation happening in most American living rooms, in most cable news cycles, does not match the reality of what is actually happening on the ground. Israel has made clear that despite a ceasefire eventually brokered with Iran, it would continue its operations against Hezbollah in Lebanon. Prime Minister Netanyahu's office insisted that the ceasefire with Tehran did not cover Lebanon. Think about the significance of that distinction. The United States brokered one ceasefire with Iran, a 2-week pause in the direct exchange of fire between American and Iranian forces, and Israel immediately said that deal does not cover its fight with Hezbollah. In other words, the same conflict continues in a slightly different configuration, with Iran technically on pause while its proxy army continues the war it launched in Iran's name. This is the kind of diplomatic complexity that matters enormously for understanding where this is all going, and almost nobody in mainstream American media is explaining it with the seriousness it deserves. According to the Israeli military, Hezbollah fired approximately 5,500 rockets at IDF troops operating in southern Lebanon, plus an additional 2,500 rockets at Israel itself during the fighting, and Israeli authorities say at least 1 to 800 Hezbollah operatives have been killed since March 2, and yet Hezbollah is still firing, still launching rockets, still conducting attacks even after a ceasefire announcement. Even amid the ceasefire, Hezbollah violated the terms by targeting Israeli artillery positions and launching drones at Israel, claiming it was responding to Israeli violations of the same agreement, each side accusing the other of breaking the rules of an agreement neither side fully accepted to begin with. This is not peace, this is managed violence. It is the kind of low-grade warfare that continues for years and decades, consuming communities on both sides of a border, displacing populations, destroying infrastructure, and poisoning any possibility of genuine political resolution. By early March, more than 300,000 southern Lebanese residents had already been displaced due to the conflict, and Lebanese authorities later reported that over 1.2 million people had been forced to flee their homes since March the 2nd alone, with more than 2,300 people killed in Lebanon during this period, including 177 children. I want you to hold those numbers alongside each other. Over 1 million people displaced, more than 2,000 dead, an entire country south being depopulated, with Israeli Defense Minister Katz announcing that Israel would demolish Lebanese border settlements and occupy southern Lebanon up to the Litani River as part of a long-term security buffer strategy. This is a fundamental reshaping of the physical and demographic landscape of a country, and Lebanon, already economically destroyed, already politically paralyzed, already a state in name only in large parts of its territory, is absorbing all of this on top of everything it already carried. According to the World Bank's Lebanon assessment, the previous round of conflict had already cost Lebanon $14 billion total, with physical damages of $6.8 billion and productivity losses of $7.2 billion, causing Lebanon's real GDP to decline by 7.1% in 2024 alone. That was before 2026, before this new war, before the fresh wave of displacement and destruction. Lebanon is a country being systematically destroyed, not by some inevitable historical force, but by the very specific decisions of political and military actors who have chosen this outcome over any other available option. And here is the larger pattern that I think deserves the most serious attention, because it touches something that goes far beyond the specific geography of Lebanon and Israel. What you are watching right now is the collapse of the post-Cold War security architecture in the Middle East. The system of deterrence, proxy management, diplomatic containment, and occasional military pressure that the United States and its regional partners had constructed over decades to keep the most explosive conflicts at a manageable temperature. That architecture is gone. The killing of Khamenei was not just the elimination of a particular leader, It was a statement that the United States and Israel had decided to stop trying to manage Iran and had chosen instead to fundamentally alter its power structure. Whether that decision was wise or catastrophic will be debated for decades, but the consequences of it are now being written in real time, in rocket fire and displaced families and burning cities. President Trump himself said bluntly that as part of any deal between Washington and Tehran to end the American war on Iran, Iran would have to cut its backing of proxy groups, including Hezbollah in Lebanon. Yeah, they'll have to cut that, Trump told a reporter. That's a must. Now that is an extraordinary statement when you think about what it actually means. The United States is telling Iran that the price of peace is the dismantlement of the entire proxy network that Iran has spent 40 years building, funding, and arming as its primary strategic tool for projecting power across the region. Iran is being asked essentially to surrender the architecture of its foreign policy, and doing that, if Iran were even willing to contemplate it, would not happen through a press conference statement or a diplomatic communique. It would require a fundamental renegotiation of the relationship between Tehran and its allied groups, each of which has its own internal politics, its own armed factions, its own commanders who have spent their entire adult lives fighting under the banner of the Iranian revolutionary project. Hezbollah without Iranian backing is not simply a weaker Hezbollah, it is a structurally different organization, one that would have to reinvent its purpose, its funding model, its ideological justification, and its relationship to the Lebanese state and to the Shia community it claims to represent. That transformation, if it happened at all, would take years and would almost certainly involve significant internal violence. You do not dismantle 40 years of institution building in a press conference. And meanwhile, the rockets keep falling, the bombs keep dropping, and the people on both sides of the Israel-Lebanon border keep paying the price for decisions made in capitals far from where they live. What I find most remarkable and most troubling about this entire situation is the way in which the global moral conversation around it has fractured so completely. The World Health Organization called for the protection of civilians. A senior Israeli security official warned that this is heading towards serious escalation, saying, "We have more capabilities and tools, and we can conduct campaigns in parallel against Iran and against Lebanon." The Lebanese government holds emergency meetings that change nothing. The United Nations monitors a ceasefire that both sides are violating. And in Washington, the political conversation is already turning toward what kind of deal can be struck with a post-Khamenei Iranian leadership that may itself be deeply divided about what Iran's future looks like. Trump himself said Iran is rudderless due to infighting, while reports indicate the IRGC is in control, and some sources say Khamenei was gravely injured rather than killed, a detail whose clarity matters enormously for what comes next. Because here is the truth that nobody in the comfortable analytical space of Western commentary wants to say directly, there is no clean outcome here. There is no version of this conflict that ends with a stable, democratic Lebanon free of Hezbollah, a defanged and compliant Iran, and a secure Israel at peace with its neighbors. Not in the near term, and possibly not in any term foreseeable from where we stand today. What is more likely is a prolonged, grinding renegotiation of power in the region, with enormous human cost, massive economic disruption, and consequences for global energy markets, for American military commitments, and for the basic question of what international law and sovereignty actually mean in a world where the strongest actors simply choose when to follow the rules and when to rewrite them. That question, who gets to decide when the rules apply, is the deepest one being raised by everything happening right now in Lebanon, Israel, and Iran. And the answer being written by events on the ground is one that every American who cares about the world their children will inherit should be paying very close attention to.